see it. It's not really a fair fight, So I just tried to go through as clean as possible and try to get into my rhythm at one point when I cleared the midfield. But we had too much tech. We were just really graining a lot on the tires, and that then compromised a lot the rest of the race. We thought with a hard compound that it would be better today for us, but unfortunately that compound somehow didn't work today. They will be quick everywhere.
You think so?
Yeah, for sure. But with McLaren, I don't know. I mean, in Bahrain, it looked like they were faster. It's very hard to say. I think we just need to see track by track. But, I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you're third fastest or fourth fastest. We are aiming for the top, right? So we just try to work to that steadily. I hope, of course, throughout the season we can close that gap, because at the moment it's still a decent gap.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Max.
Max Verstappen finished 6th in Australia, but the truly shocking thing wasn't the result. It was what he said immediately afterward over the radio and to the press. This car is extremely frustrating to drive. And now I'll ask you something very direct. Are we witnessing simple frustration after a difficult race, or the first major sign of real tension between Verstappen, Red Bull, and the new technical era of Formula One? Before we continue, I want to hear from you. Leave your opinion in the comments. Do you think Verstappen can fight for the championship with this car? Or are we seeing the beginning of a bigger problem? Because Max's statement in Melbourne reveals much more than meets the eye. Stay until the end, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In this analysis, we're going to break down what really happened with Verstappen during the Australian Grand Prix. From the qualifying crash to the comeback from last place, and especially the statement that offered a very clear picture of the true state of the Red Bull Ford project in this new technical era. To understand Max Verstappen's statement after the Australian Grand Prix, we must begin with the technical scenario Red Bull faced in Melbourne. The season began under a new regulatory era, much more dependent on energy management and the balance between the hybrid engine, battery, and tires. In theory, Red Bull and Ford had worked for months to build a solid foundation with the new car, but from the first practice sessions of the weekend, it was already clear that the car wasn't at the same competitive level as some of its direct rivals. Verstappen was very clear even before getting into the car for qualifying. He said the team had a lot of work ahead of them and that the performance deficit was no surprise to him. The main problem wasn't an unstable or difficult to balance car, as had been the case in other recent seasons. The problem was deeper. The car wasn't generating the overall grip the driver needs to confidently push the limits of the track. Verstappen explained that the car simply couldn't get grip on all four wheels simultaneously, which on a circuit like Albert Park becomes a serious disadvantage. When the car lacks that natural grip, the driver can't aggressively enter corners or accelerate with complete confidence on the exit. Analysis of long runs during practice confirmed this feeling. The car performed reasonably well in fast corners, where downforce helped maintain stability, but it struggled much more on the exit of slow corners and in the final acceleration phase of each lap. In that final sector, several tenths of a second were lost compared to the fastest cars on the grid. In practical terms, this meant that the RB22 might look competitive in some parts of the circuit, but the overall lap time revealed a clear disadvantage compared to Mercedes and other teams as well. The turning point of the weekend came in the first part of qualifying. Up until that point, Red Bull was still confident that Verstappen could put the car in a reasonable grid position and limit the damage against Mercedes and Ferrari. However, at the start of his flying lap in the first qualifying session, something completely unexpected happened. As he approached the first corner, the rear axle of the car suddenly locked up, and the car immediately lost stability, sending it straight into the wall. It wasn't a typical overdriving error or an overly aggressive braking entry. The car's behavior was so abrupt that doubts about a possible technical failure immediately arose. The most striking thing came in Verstappen's post-race comments. The Dutchman explained that the rear axle locked up completely and appeared without any prior warning. For a driver with his experience, accustomed to detecting even the slightest change in the car's behavior, that sensation was completely anomalous. In fact, he himself told the media that he had never experienced anything like it in his racing career. The result was devastating for the rest of the weekend. The RB22 was damaged, and Verstappen finished last on the grid for Sunday's race. Strategically, this completely changed Red Bull's approach to the Grand Prix. Instead of fighting for leading positions, the objective became a survival comeback to salvage valuable points. However, what truly set the tone for the rest of the weekend wasn't just the crash itself, but the emotional and technical reaction Verstappen displayed immediately afterward. The Dutchman first went to the circuit's medical center for a routine checkup and shortly afterward appeared before the media. At that moment, many expected a reaction focused solely on the incident or the possible technical cause of the rear axle lockup. However, Verstappen decided to go much further in his analysis. His statements weren't limited to the accident. He actually used that moment to express a much broader criticism of the technical direction Formula One has taken with the new generation of cars. The statement that attracted the most attention was direct and very unusual for a driver in the thick of the championship battle. Verstappen clearly stated that he wasn't enjoying driving these cars at all. He explained that the behavior of the new cars depends too much on energy management and electronic systems that constantly influence driving style. For a driver whose style has always been characterized by aggressively and intuitively pushing the limits, this more controlled, software-dependent driving style is frustrating. This criticism wasn't just a one-off complaint about a bad day. It was a profound reflection on how the driving experience has changed in this new technological era. Within the Red Bull team, the reaction was more restrained but equally revealing. The immediate objective was to rebuild the car and prepare the strategy for an extremely challenging race starting from last place. The engineers focused on recovering as much performance as possible from the car while analyzing what had happened in qualifying. At the same time, a message of calm was conveyed from the team's technical management. Red Bull knew that the start of the season could be difficult and that the car still had room for development. The priority was to limit the damage to the championship and gather as much information as possible about the RB22's behavior in race conditions. Sunday began with an extremely difficult mission for Max Verstappen. Starting from last place on a street circuit like Albert Park always limits strategic options, even for a driver of the Dutchman's caliber. Red Bull's initial objective was quite realistic, to try to gain positions in the opening laps, avoid traffic incidents, and stay in contention for points. In the early stages of the race, Verstappen's approach was clear. He didn't attempt desperate overtakes. His approach was methodical, calculating each move and taking advantage of every opportunity the car's pace offered in clean air. As the laps progressed, the comeback began to take shape. Verstappen used his ability to manage pace on long runs and started to recover positions, capitalizing on other drivers' mistakes and strategic moments in the race. The car showed some clear strengths in certain sectors of the circuit, especially in medium and high-speed corners, where the aerodynamic stability allowed for overtaking maneuvers in the DRS activation zones. That combination of straight-line efficiency and good corner exit speed allowed the Red Bull driver to steadily progress through the field. However, the race also exposed the car's true limitations. Verstappen began reporting over the radio that the tires were degrading sooner than expected, especially in the first stint. Graining appeared relatively quickly and forced the driver to ease off the pace at various points in the race. When it came time to switch to the hard compound, the situation didn't improve much. As Verstappen himself explained after the race, that tire was clearly more difficult to get working with the RB22, forcing him to drive more conservatively than usual. Despite these limitations, Verstappen managed a very solid comeback to finish in 6th place. Moving from 20th to a top 6 finish confirms the driver's competitiveness even when the car isn't the fastest on the grid. After the Australian Grand Prix, Verstappen himself was very clear in analyzing Red Bull's competitive situation. In his post-race comments, he acknowledged that the performance deficit compared to Mercedes was considerable. According to his own estimates, the difference was around 0.8 of a second per lap, a gap too large to be compensated for solely through talent or strategy. In modern Formula One, a gap of that size means that even a driver in exceptional form has very little margin for error to consistently fight for victories. Therefore, his words were not simply a momentary complaint, but a fairly direct assessment of the car's true level at the start of the season. He also delivered another very significant message about the team's objectives. Verstappen explained that regularly finishing between 3rd and 6th place is not the type of result Red Bull aims for in Formula One. The team's internal standard remains fighting for wins and championships, not simply scoring points. Such statements have a twofold effect within a team. On one hand, they reflect competitive ambition, but on the other, they also increase the pressure on the engineers and the car's development program. Interestingly, despite this open criticism of performance, Verstappen also hinted that the team was already expecting a difficult start to the season. The development of the new car and its full integration with the power unit associated with the Ford project are still in an early stage of evolution. This means that the car's true potential could depend on the first major aerodynamic upgrades arriving in the coming races. In other words, the team doesn't seem to be in crisis mode, but rather in a rebuilding phase where each upgrade package will be crucial to closing the gap. Looking at Max Verstappen's entire Australian Grand Prix weekend paints a fairly clear picture of the current situation. On the one hand, the driver continues to demonstrate why he is considered the absolute benchmark on the grid. Starting from last place and finishing in the top 6 on a circuit where overtaking is never easy confirms that his level of execution remains extraordinary. Even in a weekend riddled with problems, Verstappen was able to transform a qualifying disaster into a solid championship result. This ability to maximize every opportunity is precisely what has defined his dominant era in Formula One. But at the same time, the driver's own statements reveal something deeper than a simple sporting result. The frustration he expressed after the race wasn't solely directed at the qualifying incident or the tire degradation during the Grand Prix. His words reflected genuine discomfort with the car's handling and the technical philosophy that governs this new generation of cars. When a driver like Verstappen openly states that driving the car is frustrating, the message doesn't go unnoticed in the paddock. From now on, the evolution of the RB22 will be one of the most decisive elements of the championship. Red Bull needs to find pure performance in the chassis, improve tire management, and close the gap with the teams currently setting the pace. If the upcoming updates manage to close that gap, the landscape could change very quickly. With a competitive car, Verstappen remains one of the most dangerous drivers in Formula One when it comes to fighting for wins and titles. Now I want to know your opinion. Do you think Verstappen is exaggerating his frustration, or are these cars really taking Formula One away from what it always was? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.